We've done loans with them in the past where they borrow activities and we borrow for Christmas. But yeah, this is like the biggest one because we're plus.
Darn.
Oh, okay. That's fine. I don't need my slides anyway.
Well,
Slide up.
if you want a weekend trip to New Haven and you and your mom are interested, sign on up because there's a bus that'll take you, and there's hotels, and you get to
It's been so nice seeing the
get a
save
tour.
the date.
Yes.
Hot off the press information.
Exactly.
So excited.
Exactly. Yeah, I announced it day one. So yes, it is real. So we're talking about it. So thank you for being here. Let's get started.
This chair is for you. If anybody wants it.
That was me thinking about the 8 different bags I've got. Where's my bag with my brain material?
Question I ask myself
Okay, well, welcome everyone. So people will join us. I guess they're making their way over here from their coffee. So I just would like to thank you again for being here, and thank Zoran and Pablo for being here and presenting. I'm going to close this door so that we are not. That worked out.
Of course.
Yeah. So just to say a few words, I mean, Zoran and I have been collaborating on this empathy building idea from day one. When I first reached out to her, she probably thought that I was a crazy woman, obsessed with empathy, and she has already been working in museums and developing creative thinking modules, right, curriculum, and she was interested in this idea of empathy building, focusing on the empathy, and she has been a contributor to both of my books. And then, most importantly, she helped me develop that chart that I use, the empathy definition chart, with the layers, because I didn't want to go on myself. I'm not a scientist. I wanted to have, sort of evidence-based words to use in my as I was starting. So everything is basically right. It's the foundational block. And through Zorana, later on, I was introduced to Pablo and Pablo's amazing work on art psychology, I guess, or aesthetics. And they have this, I'm not going to talk more. I mean, you'll see it, but I'm really dying to learn more about their new project. That's it's a grant, they received a grant, and it's about mirroring. So it's about mirrors, and mirror is a big metaphor in Sufi literature. I opened my the day one with a poem from Rumi, and like everything, and once you're a carpenter, everything looks like a nail or something, or vice versa. So to me, everything is like that right now. So I can't wait to hear. So please introduce yourselves and take it on. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. And I just realized on the first day of the conference that I've been here at the summit for all 5 of them. It's been really exciting. And John, there in the back.
That's right, John too, yay!
And it's been quite a journey. So thank you, Lee, for the invitation, and thank you everybody for being here. So my name is Zorana Cevic, and I am a research scientist at the DL Center for Emotional Intelligence. And my background is in psychology. My research is in psychology of creativity. And for this project, I partnered with...
Hi, Pablo Tinio. I thought I'm going to say my name first.
No, it's building the drum.
Oh, yeah. I am I'm professor and chair of the Department of Educational Foundations at Montclair State University, where I also run the Creativity and Aesthetics Lab. And like Zorana, we're both psychologists, and my area is psychology of aesthetics and the arts within cultural institutions as well as educational settings.
So I will get us started. And in this project, what we were wondering is these big questions about experience of art and potential of art. Okay, I will figure out the clicker, just 1 second. And there we go. So we wonder about these big things that happen to people as they experience art, and in particular, as they experience art in museums. So we are here at the Phillips Collection, and I hope that you will all have time to go and experience it. And something happens when we experience art. We are here from the museum world, and we know this intuitively. We want to study it. We want to see what happens and how we can describe it. They're interested in the thoughts and insights that people have as they leave the museum. That sense of encounter, and Mary Hall was taking us through this wonderful exercise yesterday of that encounter and reaching into conversation with an artist. And then that change thinking, something that happens as a change as we experience art. So I will take you on a little excursion of a personal encounter with art. This was a few years ago, and this is a piece by Salvador Dali at the Dali Museum in St. Pete, Florida. So it was a family vacation, and we went to Florida in February, coming from New Hampshire. That was great. And this is a piece that really grabbed both me, and it turns out it grabbed my son too. And so this is the photo I took in the museum itself, but it's a little bit, angled. So here is a better look at the photo, at the piece. And what happened here is that my son, who was at the time 7 years old, said, "Mommy, who is the dead person in this picture?" And I was struck by this comment. And I did not read at the time, what is this painting about? So I went to the actual label and wanted to see what is this about. I could see what he was saying kind of from the feel of the painting, but I did not have the information. And so this is him at the time, and this is trip to Florida, and this is from the same trip. We also went to Legoland, as you can see, so Florida. But he really was onto something. He was completely right. He did get into the mind of the artist. The title of this piece is Portrait of My Dead Brother. And this was a very important piece for Dali, and his relationship with his dead brother was very much looming in his life. And when you look at the label, what the museum label said, this unusual painting refers to one of the key stories in the artist's life, his relationship with his dead brother. While Salvador was named after his father, Salvador Dali Pussy, he also shared his name with his brother, Salvador Gallo Anselmo Dali, who died of infectious stomach inflammation in 1903. Dali felt his parents wanted him to be a replacement for his dead brother. So he cultivated his eccentric behavior, which we know of, to prove that he was different. Dali felt that although his brother was dead, he was still a specter in his life. And then the label went on to give some more details, and it gave this quote from Dali himself describing the piece. The vulture, according to the Egyptians and Freud, represents my mother's portrait. The cherries represent the molecules. The dark cherries create the visage of my dead brother. The sun-lighted cherries create the image of Salvador, living, thus repeating the great men of the Dioscorus, Castor, and Pollux. And I started the story with a 7-year-old who did not read any of this, but he really engaged with the piece, and he really got to the point of this piece. So what was happening here? And I tried to understand. I was very impressed, obviously, as a proud mother. I was very impressed with, look what my kid can do. And what he could formulate, he couldn't formulate the whole process, but he could formulate some things. First, he noticed this overall impression, almost like pixelated feel of the piece, the gloominess of it, the grayness of it. And then he noticed some details. He especially talked about the bird. And in putting some of these things together, he got to that point of meaning making and asking, who is the dead person? So the gloom and the menacing bird made a picture in his mind of a dead person. So 7-year-old can do it. Chances are rest of us can do it. And it turns out that in the psychology of creativity, aesthetics, and the arts, there is a model that we have taken as a basis for our research. And it's called the mirror model of art that was formulated by our very own Pablo. Mirror model of the art, in very brief, the very briefest, quick elevator ride, states that the artistic appreciation experience, the experience we have as viewers of art, mirrors in a reverse fashion the process of art creation. And Pablo will take you exactly through those steps and tell you what that looks like.
I have 2 kids, and they can also do the same thing. So the mirror model of art, that's the citation. Wants to read it. I'm going to use painting as an example. Although the model was proposed in 2013. It's almost 10 years old now. And it has been applied to other areas besides the visual arts. And when we begin with the art making process, and an artist doesn't just make something to make something, perhaps, right? But we know from a lot of research that typically creations are founded on ideas, they're founded on emotions, they're founded on things that the artist wants to express, whatever that is, right? It could be something political, if they're an activist, it could be something emotional, and it could just simply be their own take on an aspect of the world that they want us to see maybe differently, right? There's that idea, the initialization. We know from studies of art, Picasso has done it, Matisse, pretty much like a lot of, one of the fundamental skills that artists have is this idea of studies, right? They create sketches, many sketches sometimes. Sometimes it takes years of sketches to be able to get to the structure of whatever it is that they're creating. So it begins with the initialization of a piece. And again, I'm using this painting as an example. At some point that we have the canvas, and it is not unusual for a painter to do an underdrawing on the canvas that basically, depicts all the main shapes and the structure and the composition of that painting. Then, as the process expands and adapts, I call it the expansion and adaptation, because as you're creating, oftentimes you realize something. Oh, I want to change this. Maybe I want to kind of focus more on this part of the canvas. Maybe I want to kind of tie things together better, right? If it's not, it's kind of like disparate at first. But as the work progresses, what we do notice is that layers start building up, right? Layers of materials. Whether that, and typically with this example, it's going to be paint, right? Or whatever else, what, they add to the canvas. They start to refine the shapes. They start to darken some lines. And at this stage, sometimes they'll start to add color. And then again, what happens is that you're not only building up materials, but you're also adding layers of ideas to the initial sort of stage of the creative process. And towards the end, more layers are put on the canvas. So more paint, colors added, some touch-ups, and then certainly the texture is already at the surface. So sometimes, as you walk around here, these artworks on the wall, I think these are prints, right? So basically they're very flat. But if you go upstairs and you see some of the paintings, they're very textural, some of them, right? They're very thick paint and even other items embedded into the surface of the canvas. That's the finalizing. So we go with the art making process, we go from the idea, the foundation, the motivation behind the piece. This is what I want to communicate. And then layers are built up so we get to that point. Now, let's go to the aesthetic experience. And what we know from studies on psychology of aesthetics, the perception of objects, the perception of paintings, is that the first things that we actually process and we engage with are the last things that the artist put down. So we first process color, we process contrast, we look at texture, and so forth. This is before we go deep into it to try to figure out what is actually being shown in this piece. As we spend more time, this could happen in seconds, by the way, and a lot of it's largely automatic. And then the more we engage with that painting, we start to recognize certain things. Oh, that's that's a hand, that's a face, and then if it's like some big canvas, you might say, oh, it's a landscape with a mountain in the background, and then right in front is a river, right? And then there's animals or whatever. If it's an abstract piece, the same thing. What we try to do with abstract pieces almost automatically, and this is a psychological thing, is that we try to find something to recognize. That's actually the first kind of action after we do the surface. We go, okay, you notice that when you look at an abstract piece, you're like, that definitely looks like a face. All right, like look at that. Do you see the face? No. There's a face there. No, I don't see a face. So our memory really kicks in because that's an adaptive response. As humans, we need that to survive. We need to recognize objects quickly because we need to know, should we approach it? Should we avoid it? Or something like do nothing at all right? And then the more we engage with the piece, we start asking questions, right? I wonder what this is. Who's the artist, right? Let me look at the label. What's behind this? What year was this made? And then you're like, oh, that's like post-World War II. Or this is the beginning of the modernist movement, and so forth. And then we start really, looking deeply and engaging with some of the initial things, ideas, concepts, emotions perhaps, that motivated the work. So these are correspondences. I call them level 1, level 2, level 3. And again, if you later on, when we go to the galleries, just kind of notice yourself, first thing you look at, first thing you interact with is really the last thing that the artist put down. And then as we get deeply into it, we end that aesthetic experience typically with some sort of understanding, some sort of resolution. Oh, this is what it's about. That makes sense. And it helps to read the label. But sometimes we don't need to read the label. Sometimes we can guess as to what this piece is about. That's the mirror model in a nutshell. And I'm gonna, talk a little bit about some of the things that we're actually mirroring. We've done studies on this, feelings certainly, thoughts, understandings, and meanings. And this is where empathy really kind of comes in, right? The mirror model is really kind of like a model of empathy, because as we're standing in front of a piece, we're trying to kind of get to what it's about. And as we're trying to get to what it's about, we're also trying to get to what the artist was thinking, feeling, considering, expressing, and all those things. And certainly the cognitive processes. And I'm going to give you an example of a study that we did at the Whitney Museum. This is at the Whitney. I have some newish data, but I'm going to present this because I think it's fairly easy to recognize some of the works and so forth. There are two exhibitions we compared. The traditional, here's our collection, Whitney collection with Ava Hesse, A.A. Bronson, and so forth, right? We compared that exhibition with another one by Corey Archangel. I don't know if you've been to a Corey Archangel exhibit. It's not the same as the first one. The first one is really solemn, kind of like somber, kind of serious, very formal. These are the masterpieces in the Whitney's collection. This is not. They're like moving things, they're video games, there are things you touch and interact with. You walk into the exhibition, it's actually super loud. Like it's sometimes a little overwhelming in some of the galleries. But they had two floors. We compared the first floor with the second floor. We also did individual artworks just to make sure it still happens within hours. So what we're trying to figure out, the questions that we ask, two questions. One, to what extent, so we have emotional profiles here of the exhibitions. This is based on writings about them. So for this is gonna should be kind of playful, should be kind of lighthearted. The first exhibition with the permanent collection, again, pretty serious, very formal. If you walk into the galleries, very quiet. So we compared the two. To what extent are visitors gonna report those emotional profiles, right? Because certainly, and that's never been tested before at that time. Like nobody's ever said, hey, is there a transfer of emotion or whatever from artwork to viewer? And that's what we were after. We did the same thing with individual artworks. And then the second question is, to what extent will the audience share these emotions, right? So for example, the sort of formal way, technical way that some curators look at it is, you walk into a museum, your emotional reaction is gonna be fundamentally different from yours. Why? Because you're very different. Life histories, training, interests in art, and so forth. From my perspective as a psychologist, that makes absolutely no sense, right? Because we share the same brains. Honestly, like your brain is probably 99.99999% the same as mine. So we should share more than we don't, right? And I think for me, that's really hopeful. It means that we're more similar than we are different. So we tested that. We didn't want to ask people, after they walked out of the exhibition or looked at a piece of work and said, what did it make you feel? Because then they're gonna give me about 6 answers. It made me feel sad, right? Oh, it made me feel excited or happy or interested. We usually have 6 or 7. We've done numerous studies. We gave them this as a measure. It's called the Geneva Emotion Wheel by Scher's group from Switzerland. And what you would do is check off the dominant emotion, and then also check off the intensity of the emotion. The farther you are, to the edge of the thing, the stronger the emotion, the bigger the circle. Or you can report no emotion felt, and if you felt some other emotion that's not here, you write it down. Nobody did that. We had about 500 participants for this particular study. All the emotions are here. And what this method does is it is still verbal, but one of the hardest things is for people to talk about their emotions, because they can't access it, you can't verbalize it. It depends on your linguistic capacities and so forth. So it kind of solves that problem a little bit, not fully, of course, because again, it's still verbal. And what we did then is, at the time, I was doing a lot of research on eye tracking, and this is how we present eye tracking data with heat maps. And then we, got this idea of why not do heat maps, sort of map this, and the hotter it is, the more people reported that emotion. The labels here are missing, but basically, if you look at Corey Archangel, this is interest, amusement, laughter, all right? And then you got something with that exhibition. Let me go back to this. you get a little bit of involvement, interest, and then kind of like a lot more of the serious emotions. We did the same thing with individual pieces of work, Georgia O'Keeffe. With O'Keeffe, she actually wrote about nostalgia in relation to this piece, right? So the question is, will nostalgia be transferred? I hate to use that word, but I'll use it just for, it's simple, to the viewers, to the audience. And it did, right? People reported nostalgia, which you would never get usually with visitors, 500 visitors. So they reported nostalgia and they agreed that, wow, I felt nostalgia while looking at this Georgia O'Keeffe painting. And then Grosvenor, a sculpture, we had this amusement, interest in all these things. And then here with A.A. Bronson, this is a picture of his partner on his deathbed, dying of AIDS. Pity and compassion, that's what they reported. And very specific. I mean, if you think about it, I don't remember the last time I looked at a piece and I think, oh, I feel pity and compassion, right? So that's the study, and I'm gonna hand it off to Zorana to kind of continue this theme, and because they're really, these kinds of ways of thinking and measuring and trying to understand how people mirror these things is driving a lot of what we do in some of the projects that we're working on.
So what Pablo was talking about is studies and applying the mirror model to understanding emotional experiences that artists are trying to portray based on their writings and their descriptions of their pieces, and then what visitors are reporting as their experience. But this mirroring can happen in relation to other things too. And in the project that we are working on right now, we are interested in meaning making, new understandings, new insights people reach from interaction with art. And these are some pieces that are meaningful to me personally. This piece here is by Francisco de Zurbarán, who was a 16th to 17th century Spanish painter. This piece is in the MFA and the MFA in Boston, which is very good because it's very close to me and I can go see it every couple of months. And in my family, that is known as seeing mommy's painting. And this is a piece by Jacob Lawrence from the museum where we are right now, and one of my favorites that I always come and see when I'm in the Philips. And these are illustrating some things that we had a wonderful, very deep chance of experiencing yesterday when Mary Cole was taking us through her exercise. Some things have emerged there that we are gaining insights about ourselves, we are gaining insights about the world, and sometimes we cannot really distinguish the two. I think that Ray, you were mentioning that, well, you can't quite separate self and the world, and it's self in the world and this one merging of self and the world sometimes. And I think these are representing a little bit of these processes. Another ingredient that creates this meaning and understanding is the emotional aspect. So what Pablo was talking about, and my research, I work at a place called Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. What we study is how emotions and cognition and thinking come together. You can't separate the two. Sometimes we separate the two for the sake of study and simplification, and lots of science by its nature is simplification, and that's sometimes okay. But our very foundational work is they really work together. And especially when we're talking about meaning, especially when we are talking about those transformational insights and new perspectives, understanding and emotion are coming together. So for me personally, just to use that example, this piece is very unlike what I normally like. I normally like pretty loud. I think Aisha was saying the other day how she showed up in an orange dress. I'm in an orange skirt. I am very orange. And so I tend to be gravitating towards art that is bolder in nature. And this is complete opposite. There is essentially no background, very subdued tones. But what I see here, again, you cannot describe just emotion and cognition separately. I see being in the presence of God. And that's the only thing I can say about it. I stand in front of it and I feel this sense of peace and a sense of presence where the world dissolves just like the world dissolves here. And this piece is a very different kind of understanding that is created. I remember first time that I visited the Phillips, I knew kind of cognitively, I knew of Jacob Lawrence's work, but I haven't seen it in person. I knew about history of African American migration north, but this made it very visceral. It was gaining an insight about it that just reading in a book would not have created. It helped me personally kind of situate and understand it more deeply and be able to approach history in a different way, and from a perspective of being a white person trying to understand this piece of Black history. So our project is getting to these kinds of understandings, and we are just about to start, and I hope next year at the summit I see you and we present findings. We are going to go and we have a partnership with the Whitman Museum, and we are going to interview visitors. And instead of doing the study the way it is oftentimes done in our fields, where you want to have full control and you want to show everybody the same painting, we are going to do it backwards. We are going to do it, put it upside down. And we are interested in the potential of art to create new understanding. And when is that potential realized? It's realized when you have the experience of a piece of work, a piece of art that you connect with in this meaning-making sense. So we're going to ask people to physically take us to the piece that is most meaningful to them, and then we're going to interview them to understand what kinds of insights people are reaching. So this is the second kind of mirroring that happens. First being emotional, second being of understanding, and then we are also studying this third kind of mirroring that happens, and that is mirroring of cognitive processes. So if you think of the mirror model again, what Pablo was just saying is there's this mirroring between the creative process, the artistic creative process, and then the process of art appreciation. And that artistic process is a creative process. I am a psychologist and I study the creative process, not just in artists, but also in a lot of other kinds of situations with scientists, with entrepreneurs. And I'm interested in what happens, especially what happens between having an idea and doing it, making it come to life. And so if there's this mirroring of the artistic process and the experiential process, then there could be this transfer of creative thinking that people gain access to. And I have done some research along those lines, a little bit indirectly, where I have a ongoing project now more than 10 years, with an art center in Spain, Centro Botín in Santander, Spain. And we've been brought on board with this museum that was just being founded at the time, to create educational programming. And the idea was to build emotion skills and creative thinking skills together through engagement with the arts. And we have created these programs for children, adolescents, adults, families, whole families, and this keeps going on. And we studied what happens with people who go through these programs. I'm just going to show you one thing here. And what we found is that there really is this learning and this fostering of creative thinking. So this is an example from a course for professional adults, and they go through 8 sessions, 8 weeks in a row, a couple of hours each session, and they deeply engage with art, and there are different exercises. Each is building on the one before and getting deeper, and then kind of people are gently directed towards applying these skills to their everyday life situations. And these are activities of sustained observation, a lot of reflection and thinking, applied thinking. And what we have found when we studied what happens with people as they go through this process, we tested them before, we tested their creative thinking before they start. So here, the dotted line is people in the what we call experimental group, people who go through the actual course, and then the full line is people who did not. And at the start, they're the same, they were randomly selected. But then what happens is people in the experimental group, their creative thinking goes up. And 2 months later, we test them again. Well, it went a little bit down, but it is still significantly different than where they started and significantly different from where the control group is. So we know something really happens. There is this gaining of new skills and applying of new skills. So in our project that we are starting right now, we are going to study that in the context of visiting a museum that is not in an educational program, but as we visit a museum in a one-time event. We do not believe that in a one-time event you're actually building creativity skills, but we think that what happens is you are primed for creative thinking. You get more access to creative thinking that otherwise in the course of everyday life you might not think of applying otherwise. So we are going to be showing you these results next year, so stay tuned. But this is what we are building towards. And we are here from the greater museum world, and we are thinking what are the implications for museum practice of this kind of work, of the mirroring process, and how can we facilitate this process of mirroring? Because as we go deeper, then we can get more access in that relationship with the artist, and we can get more insights and gain new knowledge. So how do we facilitate that? And really capitalizing on that emotional power of art. Why are museums such powerful places for education? Because we want to be in a museum. When we go to a museum, we want to be there. And if you have children, if you remember when you were a child, oftentimes you really don't want to be at school, the traditional school. So it's a very different mindset, and we know that this choice and interest are helping deeper learning. And the question is also one of who is art for? How can we create programs for broad range of people? And I don't think that my child is, I mean, of course, I'm a proud mother, all of that, but I don't think my child is actually unique. He could engage with art, but we never did any of the scavenger hunts in museums that are oftentimes marketed to children. He never wanted to do it, and we never had interest in it because it's very superficial. And there's this assumption that kids want to do these so-called fun things, but it's actually really fun to engage deeply with a piece of art. You feel pride, you feel a sense of insight, a sense of getting something that was not there. That is very rewarding too. How can we facilitate that also? And we start with empathy, we end with empathy. The process of mirroring, as Pablo was saying, essentially process of empathy. We are getting in communion with an artist. We are giving them credit. We are engaging in a conversation with them. So fundamentally, engaging in the process of mirroring more deeply is a process of empathy. And there, I would like to just say thank you to our funders at the Templeton Religion Trust, and thank you, Lee, for inviting us here for the 5th time.
This was wonderful, and maybe let's have 5-6 minutes for questions before we take a 5-minute break, and that break, the same break, including us getting to Gallery 116 upstairs. So I don't know how that's going to happen, but we did a hybrid event, so that's possible too. I guess, like being in the two places at the same time. Yes.
Thank you so much. I'm just trying to think about the way we often teach at the National Gallery is we start with surfacing observations. We spend like a minute or two having people, just look and then describe what they see. And we kind of work with a framework that point of emotional connection or judgment comes after working through the careful looking. And I'm just wondering, there's no one right way of doing it. I'm wondering if, or positing that perhaps one might have a deeper emotional connection if you did the hard work, so to speak, of slow looking, describing, unpacking what you're curious about, and then might have that emotional connection.
So you're saying that it should be deeper. That's the hypothesis.
My hypothesis is that if you started with instead of like judgment, oh wow, this is so whatever, that emotion might be deeper if you started with the slow looking and describing.
So in about 11 minutes, that's exactly what we're gonna do upstairs. Actually, in 116. Yeah, and I think that is the case. And it hasn't been tested yet, but I'm willing to say that would be a pretty good guess, that the slower the process is. And that's what we're gonna be doing, because they are layers. You're kind of peeling back layers in a way. But the emotional part of it, the reaction happens immediately. We're gonna react emotionally the moment we see it within the first 50 milliseconds, right? We have studies on this. And that can change and evolve throughout the process. Let's also keep in mind how brief the aesthetic engagement is, even with like masterpieces. It's about 30 seconds. We've done studies at the Metropolitan Museum, and then more recently, we did at a study 2017 at the Art Institute Chicago, roughly 30 seconds. And we'll talk a little bit more about it when we get to the gallery.
Yeah. Andrew?
I have a question just to piggyback on the comment of engagement with the artwork. Do you know of any studies in terms of like over time, if that engagement is increasing with certain populations or decreasing with certain populations? Like, are people spending more time looking at things, or are they just like running through the museum on account of larger cultural trends or other things happening?
Typically, when you're in a group, it slows down, which makes sense because there's discussion. And kind of one related study, Jeff Smith did the study, a colleague of mine, is when people, the full impact of the experience within the museum, it's, of course, as you walk in, you're flustered. And this is in New York City museums. When you talk to them or survey them, measure at the middle of that time, at the middle of their visit, then the intensity goes up as far as how they're feeling about the work and like the engagement. And then right before they leave, shoots down. It's probably thinking, what subway do I gotta take? Like, what time is it? I'm late for the next one. Yeah,
Okay,
so.
cool, thank you.
Hi, thank you for that. My name's Amy. I'm from Glen Canyon Museum.
I am an educator there, I manage the education department, and I'm thinking about how lucky your son is to have you as a parent who is open and willing to just wander and allow him to have that experience, and how beneficial this experience would be for all the children, and how you are thinking about priming grown-ups, caregivers to facilitate that kind of experience for a kid, especially when running around and doing scavenger hunts is the norm in most places.
I think that's a great question, and maybe we can all be a little bit mindful of how we are with children in a museum, and not assume that children cannot do some things. And I remember when my sister-in-law's kids were about 8 and 10, they said something, let's go to the MFA because there's this kid-friendly exhibit. And I think that every exhibit is a kid-friendly exhibit, because they are going to engage in it in completely new ways. So not to make assumptions of what is kid-appropriate, so-called kid-appropriate. But from the museum educator perspective, I think there are some things that we could do as we all here creating some educational programming or involved in it indirectly, to give them choices. If you look sometimes at the tours that happen, or school visits, they oftentimes are structured in, okay, we are going to hit this, this, and this, and students just stand there, and or they are in a half circle and they're trying to say something because they have to. But what if we didn't do it like that? What if we said to kids, choose something that is meaningful to you and see what happens then? And whether they are willing to share, what they are able to share, and what can other students learn about each other and about each other's experiences. I think if we try to do it in this kind of backwards way, because we sometimes think that, well, we want them to know about this artwork because it's historically important. But if we do it like that, they might not get anything because, well, they do not care that it's historically important at that time. But if they engage, they might be more open to this historically important piece too. So that's a little that choice is a crucial ingredient in learning.
I just had a question about the Geneva emotion wheel. It's an amazing instrument. And yesterday, I just asked you to try to describe how you feel without giving you any vocabulary. Sometimes I find with students, if I give them a list of emotions, they're like, oh yeah, yeah, sure, that one, But it sounds like this is designed to actually give people more language, more choice. So I'm just curious as to how that might fit into a creative process.
It is designed in that way, and also the context of where we're running our studies. It's New York City. Most of the museums that we work with, people are in a hurry, and we have a lot of non-native English speakers, or English as a second language, and that's part of it. It's like we're really mindful, and we want to kind of give everyone the opportunity to have a nuanced response to our questions, and that's one of the reasons we did it.
And there are different tools for same purpose. This one is really elegant for studies with eye tracking and these heat maps. There are other tools that we use at the center where I work in social emotional learning that can even break it down more to the basic dimensions of emotional experience, of how pleasant it is and how much activation in the body a feeling is engaging, and then suggest more words that otherwise, especially younger students, but also sometimes people grown-ups, we did not get an education in emotions and how to express them. So we could all use some push in that regard.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have other questions, but I know where she lives, so getting the way to the both of them. So we have 5 to 6 minutes to make our ways to gallery 116, right? 116?
Yes.
Okay, and we need our pins, so make sure you have your pins visible.
The tags are up here, be sure you're wearing a tag. And it's the courtyard level, 116, it's the, we also call it the basketball gallery, it's the one with the highest ceiling.
And can we leave our things here? So you can leave your things here. And you need to wear a mask. So as I have a few extra masks here if you need it. You need to wear a mask in the gallery.
We take our stuff. Those are all free.
We can leave things here.
Liz, I have a question. Do you find that because your children are free, that people can be slower about their consideration? Because they come and they can come and see 3 things, and they don't have to like see the whole thing every single time.
I mean, that's a good thing, whether you're local, depends on what you're local.
Well, I'm just saying, like the members can come and whenever they want to, and engage with one piece of art or one.
That's the friends.
Right.
You can make friends.
Right.
That's interesting.
I mean, it's a different. It's a different
responsive to the presentation.
Right, and sort of this idea of running through and spinning
Yeah,
through,
you're
and that is.
I did- I
That's
did-
fine,
that's my
message
question.
everyone has now
That's it,
included.
like a chili.
What's that? Exactly, I've seen that.
Yeah, oh, good, I saw them earlier.
Right, exactly.
I totally need to kind
And-
yeah.
Is there
Wi-Fi here?
You know, if you,
I'll just
and I come from a different